He says, if you wish to enter into life, guard the commands. Now notice what he said there wasn't just keep. He said guard the commands. And I think that this is a huge challenge within the body. Okay, the idea of guarding the commands. Mostly what we find ourselves doing, or at least what I see people doing, is looking for ways to say, keep the commands kind of, sort of, and still do what I want to do at the same time. And that doesn't fit under the word guard. So again, I want you to picture, I've said this before and I want to say it again now, I want you to picture a guard. I'm talking about like a bodyguard, like either like special services for the president, or the guards in front of the queen at some palace somewhere. Guards who are basically sworn duty is to make sure nothing gets through, even to their own life being forfeited. You understand what I'm saying? Nobody's getting past on my life, not on my watch. You understand that idea? Like holding the gun. I'm kind of like cut my hands up like I'm holding the gun. Or maybe holding a sword. Whatever way you want to picture it, old times, new times, whatever. But it's the idea of you are standing guard where your idea is nothing is going to get through, not on my watch. I mean, is that the attitude we have about guarding the commands? Sadly, I don't think so. It should be, though. But all too often, I don't think it is. I don't think that that's the way we take the commands in terms of seriousness, that we're literally saying, not on my watch, nothing is going to tamper with, trespass on these commands. And the person who does most of that is you. So you got to be a watchman over your own mind and over your own thoughts and over your own heart. Because you're the one that's going to do the trespassing and the trampling on the commands. And so he says here, if you want to enter into life, anybody want to wish to enter into life? And when he says life, he means eternal life, because see, this is not real life. This is kind of practice life. The real life, the eternal life that's coming, he says, if you want to enter into that life, he says, guard the commands. Of course, then the gentleman, of course, plays the same kind of trick we all play. He goes, okay, well, which ones? Because he wanted to just make sure, that he knew exactly what the minimum was he had to do. Which is what we all do. Okay, if I'm going to enter into life, which ones? All of them? Some of them? Which ones do I have to keep? I can't tell you how many times people have asked me in the last 20 years about, their studying of the Word, and from the Old Testament into the New Testament. They'll ask me the question, well, how much of the Old Testament stuff transferred forward into the New? And my answer is, all of it. Why would you think it didn't all transfer across? And so here the guy's asking that same kind of question. He says to him, well, which? And Yeshua said, well, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, respect your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now notice what he's doing there is he's not naming every single command. And so some people will say, well, those are the only ones we have to do because he only mentioned those four. He was giving an example. It's like, the place where it talks about these, the 10 Commandments? And by the way, the last one is also not in the 10 Commandments, but it is in the Old Testament. In Leviticus, you find him saying things like, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I believe that's in Leviticus 19. Okay, in that section, Leviticus 17, 18, 19, and 20, is what I call expounding on the 10 Commandments. And in that section, you find every one of the 10 Commandments given in more detail. In other words, what does it mean to break any one of those other commandments? There's more details about how you steal, how you murder, how you commit adultery, how you do idolatry, whatever it is in the commands. Of course, there is one that is not mentioned in those chapters, and that is the last one, because coveting is something you need to have going on in order to break all the other ones. You do it because you covet. You do it because you want. You desire something you shouldn't have. And so that one isn't mentioned directly. It's mentioned indirectly and inferred in all of the other ones. You steal because you covet. You commit adultery because you covet. You do idolatry because you covet. You murder because you covet. All these things are because you covet. You bear false witness because you covet. Because you want to do harm to someone because somehow they have something you want or got something you thought should have been yours, or some sort of coveting. So he says here, these couple of commandments, and he throws in just to kind of bring it through the whole rest, not just the 10 Commandments. He says, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So then the young man says to him in verse 20, all these I have watched over from my youth. What do I still lack? So he had an idea that, I've been doing all of this, but somehow the Ruach had convicted him that there was something missing. And I've talked to you guys about this many times. The real growth and forward movement in terms of your moving forward spiritually begins when you start to realize that something is wrong or something is missing in your life or in what you've been doing. And so here, this man recognized that something was lacking, but he didn't know what it was. Now, just because you notice that something's lacking doesn't mean that you're willing and ready to receive when you're told what it is. And see what happens with him. Yeshua says to him, verse 21, if you wish to be perfect, go, sell what you have and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. When the young man heard the word, he went away sad because he had many possessions. See, he did not actually keep all the commandments. The truth was he was breaking a few. He was coveting. He was idolatrous in some ways, holding possessions up in a high pedestal. And so he had a love for something above his love for the Almighty. And so he was sad. But you know what? I think some of us end up in that same predicament. When you find out what the Torah says, you go away sad instead of joyful. Because after all, there's a commandment that you've come up against. Usually it's something like Sabbath keeping or what you eat, those kind of things where you might be sad because you liked something that you no longer get to have. But you know what? I mean, I've known a guy who really, I believe one of the reasons he never came over from Sunday to Saturday is because he would have had to give up his Saturday tennis game. And that was a big part of his life. He played tennis every Saturday with some church members. And I think that was a big part of why he never came across. Okay? And I'm just saying that this is just my opinion. I know people that are having trouble giving up all kinds of things. Could you imagine if you're an athlete and you're in high school and you're a boy and you want to play football, but then you realize that Friday night lights, that's when they play. So what are you going to do? Are you going to decide to play anyway? That's a tough call. That's a tough call. I mean, I was counseling an athlete who was an Olympic athlete, and he was traveling around the world doing, playing in, the track and field. He was in track and field. This was many years ago. And he had a hard time. He was, with some of those events are on Saturday. Or the finals could be on Saturday. So what do? Do you give up your love that you've committed all your life to? Because let's say he was not keeping Torah when he was first training all those years and becoming an Olympian. But then all of a sudden you find out there's a thing called Shabbat. Do you love your Olympian stuff and the gold medals and all that other stuff more than pleasing Abba? Or are you going to go away sad because you can't do that anymore? This is tough. I mean, there's nothing about this that says it's going to be easy. It's not hard to do these things, but emotionally it becomes hard because we have emotional attachments to the things we may have to give up. So mechanically it's easy. It's mechanically there's no challenge stopping your track and field career and just keeping Shabbat. Mechanically there's not an effort there. Oh, but what about the emotions? Okay, what about the emotions of understanding, hey, wait a minute, I've been training for something, now all of a sudden I realize, but the events a lot of times are on Saturdays or holy days. What am I going to do? Am I going to try to spin it and decide that somehow this is doing good on the Sabbath? Or somehow this is okay in Abba's eyes? Or, he wouldn't have here's the best one. He wouldn't have given me this gift and this talent if he didn't want me to use it. Doesn't that one sound good? Oh, that's a great one. That's a great excuse right there. I mean, that's one of the best excuses there is. Well, why would he have given me this talent if I can't use it? Who said you can't use it? You just can't use it in competition on a global scale. I mean, if you have a talent for one of these athletic things, you can still swim or jump or run or whatever it is that you do. You just don't necessarily get to compete on Saturday. Which only means that you're not going to get the accolades of the world, and so what? You want the accolades from above. You don't want the accolades of the world. At least you shouldn't. But this is tough stuff. He's saying here, look, he went away sad. And I mean, this is important that we get this. Because I get counseling questions all the time from people that are struggling with my kids or myself or whatever, and things that will involve their talents and gifts somehow being in a position of breaking a Shabbat. Because whatever they do tends to have opportunities that need to be met on those days. Performances, whether it's music or some sort, which can end up being on Saturdays, or athletic stuff that ends up on Saturday. This is a tough question, okay? So what do you do with all that? I mean, it's not just about bosses, okay? Like say your boss calling you in on Shabbat. We're supposed to guard these things. And I keep bringing up Shabbat because that's the one where we get very weak on, don't we? That's the one where we want to... I've had people come up to me and say, well, it's just, I guess this is just my ox in a ditch. Okay, you don't get to use that phrase unless. You don't get to use that phrase unless if you don't do whatever it is that you claim you need to do, somebody or something would die. That's what the ox in the ditch was about. I've had people say to me, well, I woke up Saturday morning and realized we were out of milk, so I had to go to the store. I guess that was my ox in the ditch. No, you can live without milk for one day. Matter of fact, you can go a whole day without eating. We do that every Yom Kippur. And so, no, you don't. That's not an ox in a ditch. An ox in a ditch is if there was an ox that fell in the ditch, and if you didn't pull him out, he would try so much to struggle to get out, he could break his legs and die. He could injure himself and die. That's what the ox in the ditch is about. It's not about, something that you forgot that's inconvenient, so you're going to use an excuse. We've got to be really careful with that, because that's what this guy's talking about here. Now, you think I'm being hard about this? Listen to the rest of this as we continue. Yeshua then says in verse 23 to his taught ones, truly I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter into the reign of the heavens. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the reign of Elohim. Now hold on, keep going. He says, and looking intently, and when his taught ones heard it, they said, who then is able to be saved? And looking intently, Yeshua said to them, with man this is impossible, with Elohim it's possible. In other words, you need to lean on Elohim for all the help you can get. Then Kepha answering said to him, see, we have left all and followed you. What shall we have? And Yeshua said to them, truly I say to you, when the Son of Adam sits on the throne of his esteem, you who have followed me in the rebirth shall also sit on the 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Yisrael. Now listen to the rest of this section here. And everyone who has left houses, or brothers, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, or favorite sporting event, or any other thing that you can mention here, for my authority's sake, for the sake of my reputation, for the sake of my title and my identity and who I am, he says, they shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit everlasting life. But many who are first shall be last, and the last first. You see how serious this is? He said, look, if you want to inherit everlasting life, which, by the way, this is back to the same question the young man asked, which is, what do I have to do to have everlasting life? You have to be willing to leave houses, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, wives, children, lands, everything. You have to be willing to leave everything and anything for his name's sake.